Welcome everybody to our first ComAI lecture this semester. For everybody who does not know me, I'm Andrea, coordinating together with Florian Hohmann and others and Philip Sinner this ComAI lectures with a very special guest opening this semester, Andrea Guzman. Andrea is Professor of Communication in the journalism area of the Department of Communication at Northern Illinois University. And I think many of you will know her, or I'm sure know her, because of her research on human-machine interaction, human-machine communication. She was one of the persons who built up this, well, still a working group, I think soon a division at the International Communication Association. Besides that, Andrea has published, together with Seth Lewis, one of the foundational articles in that area, at least the article from which we took this concept of this phrase of communicative AI. It was published 2020, with the title was Artificial Intelligence and Communication, a Human-Machine Communication Research Agenda. Besides that, I think everybody knows two books, co-edited by Andrea. One was in 2018, the book Human-Machine Communication, Rethinking Communication Technology and Ourselves. From my perspective, the book which really defines the field within media and communication studies. Beside that, a second highly important book in that field is the Sage Handbook of Human-Machine Communication, published 2023, and Andrea was the main editor of this volume. Also, some people from us were involved with a chapter within that book. At the moment, Andrea is writing a book on voice assistants, which shall be out coming year at Polity Press. We are very proud that Andrea Guzman is Semke Research Fellow and Fellow at our ComAI Research Unit, which is the reason why she's not only today here, but also the coming weeks, a time period which she will start today with a talk on the collective consequences of AI across media industries. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me. It is an honor to be at Zemke. I've given presentations virtually before. I think during COVID I gave one of the presentations, but it's so nice to see you all in person. Thank you so much for coming out. So, I know you all have had a very busy day, so I do appreciate you being here. I am looking forward to having a conversation with you and to all of your questions. So thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about some work in progress. As someone, I'm at a point where I have done a lot of projects and I'm starting some new projects. So that's what I'm working on, are starting new projects that build upon my old projects. Mainly because this thing called ChatGPT, maybe a few of you have heard of it, and generative AI have been changing things quite a bit. And so even going back and rethinking some of the things that Seth and I and others, Andreas, as well as others in this research group have written. Okay, oops, I skipped ahead. Hold on one second. That's because I did this without my glasses. Okay. So as Andreas already said, my area of specialty is human-machine communication. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with this topic, or newer to it, there's many approaches to human-computer interaction, to human-machine interaction. So I never assume people know what approach I come from. But again, human-machine communication at its core, okay, is the creation of meaning among humans and machines. And the study of human-machine communication is the study of the creation of meaning among people and machines and aspects thereof, inclusive of the different philosophical, theoretical, and methodological approaches within the communication discipline. And communication is large communication, so in incorporating things like media studies. And I always like to take a moment to point out these definitions and the fact that these things had to be defined. And I want to speak a little bit here to the students in the room. Because when I was a student and doing my work, I just assumed, right, you would go to ICA or you would study something and there was something already for you to study. You could choose a major. You could choose an area of research. And they're there and they exist. But when I went to do my work, I found that there was no good place that existed. And so I worked with people. It was a collective effort, including Steve Jones and a great group of supporters, to help create this area of study. I started the foundations, the first meeting of human-machine communication. We had in Puerto Rico, ICA 2015. And I have to think back because I had this first meeting of this group 2 days before I turned in my dissertation to my committee. And quite frankly, I probably didn't know even what I was doing at this point. Had I known what I was doing, I don't know if I would have gone through it because it was a lot of work, particularly as an assistant professor, someone in the United States who did not have tenure, meaning if this did not work, right, I wouldn't have a job. So there was a lot writing on this. But I want to tell the students, don't ever be afraid to go out and create your own path, right? You have to be humble enough to understand that people have done things before. And if you think there's a hole, maybe you're not understanding, but sometimes there really are holes and things missing. And you can go and work with other people to create new spaces. And this part of inclusive of the different philosophical, theoretical, and methodological approaches. This was really important to the human-machine communication group that we did this, that we put this into words. Because what often happens in research is people get into habits, right? Where we like to get into habits. And so there's certain types of theories that are followed or excluded. Now, we have our own ways of doing research, of preferring to look at things, right? And that's okay as individual scholars. But as scholars coming together, it's important to recognize the value in what other people do. And to look at research that may look different from your own research to help expand your mind. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Andrea, you said, right now, the human-machine communication is a working group. We are putting in for division status. So it will likely be voted on at ICA coming up. So we'll be a bigger group then. Okay, so just a little bit about how this group came to be, right? Places have to be created for people to do research. I want to be very clear when I talk about communication, because this also happens, right? Communication across different fields has different definitions, even within our own field of communication. And so I really think of communication, and I really borrowed from the works of Lucy Suckman, who I think is a fundamental person anyone should be reading in this area, as well as James Carey. And here, Lucy Suckman says, communication in this sense is not just a symbolic process that happens to go on in the real world, right? But a real-world activity in which we make use of language to delineate the collective relevance of our shared environment. In other words, communication isn't, I'm just not saying words to you tonight. We're creating meaning. We're creating culture. We're creating how we understand our world. And that's very different from somehow other people will define communication, like computer scientists. Right? If you look, computer scientists will often say it is the sending of a message from point A to B. And they leave it at that. But it is much more, and that becomes important with AI, as I will explain in a moment. And here, James Carey, reality is not given, not humanly existent, independent of language, and toward which language stands as a pale refraction. Rather, reality is brought into existence, is produced by communication, by, in short, the construction, apprehension, and utilization of symbolic forms. So when I think about human-machine communication, when I think about media, when I think about communication and AI, I'm thinking about how are we creating a reality, not just how are we using something. Does it work? Does it not work? All right. Also, speaking of language, thank you very much for letting me speak in English, because if I were speaking in German, this would be a very short lecture. Also, I would happily, I realize there's a lot of writing, and so I would be happy to send anyone my slides after this as well for you to read later. Yes, okay. So Seth Lewis and I, when we put together this HMC agenda for communicative AI, we came up with 3 different dimensions to think about when it comes to studying communicative AI. And I'm going to preview them quickly because it gets into what I'm going to talk about in terms of studying the collective consequences in a moment. This piece was written in 2020, so pre-Gen AI, pre-ChatGPT. Seth Lewis and I we're currently working on an update on the piece. And actually, that's one of the things I'm going to be thinking about when I'm here visiting with you all for the next month and wanting to talk about as we work to update that. So there's the functional dimension, the relational dynamics, and the metaphysical implications. The functional dimension is how does this technology work as a communicator? My first area of study was looking at how people interacted with voice assistants, Apple's Siri, Amazon's Alexa, right? So how does it function? How is it designed as a communicator? What does it do, not do, right? And what are those immediate effects? And those are the basics, right? You need to know, for example, what ChatGPT or a particular generative artificial intelligence application is doing, what it can do, what it can't do. But equally important, what do people think it can do and not do? For example, we know with artificial intelligence that people tend to put more trust in it and think it is smarter than it is because it communicates in human-like ways. So we put onto it these human-like qualities because of how it's communicating. So that's an important aspect of the functional dimension. The next is relational dynamics. So this functional dimension, for those of you who are postdocs or PhD students a little bit more advanced, a lot of this would sit in the HCI research area, as well as media studies. But a lot of this is where you traditionally find that body of work. And then we have the relational dynamics. Now, this is where I kind of have my Lucy Suckman hat on. In other words, now that we have these technologies that act as communicators, they have entered into the social actor realm. So what does this mean in terms of the relationships we're building? What sort of relationships do we build with these technologies? right? What is Siri or Alexa to me? What is ChatGPT to me, right? Is it a friend? Is it something I just ask a question like a helper? Is it a lover, right? And not only that, but then how does, in changing our communicative space, how do our human relationships rearrange around that? So I am a former journalist, and I'm so old, I worked when newspapers were still a thing, back in the early 2000s. And you know, what happens when you start inserting these technologies into a newsroom and people start turning to these technologies for help instead of to one another? Media production, media creation, journalism, public relations, advertising used to be very collaborative careers where people used to work in very open spaces and work with one another, you know, build ideas off one another. Humans, right? But what happens when we start putting AI into those spaces? Or what happens when there's less people in those spaces because the people who own the company have decided to offshore things to AI? Okay. So that's the relational dynamics. And the relational dynamics can be at organizational levels. It could be at an interpersonal level. All right, many different levels. And then there's the metaphysical implications. Okay. So we typically have defined communication as a human process. Media, that is something that is created by humans. So what happens when a machine now steps into this ontological space, or the space of being? The definition of human shifts, the definition of machine shifts. So as a journalist, as a former journalist, one way I used to think about myself is, I'm a good writer. I'm good at using words. I can write them quickly. I can get facts accurate, right? Well, along comes things like ChatGPT or other forms of AI, and it can write too. So part of this metaphysical element is also, how do we see ourselves, as well as how do we start to see one another, our humanity, and as well as ethical implications. We put ethics in there. I've not always been comfortable just putting ethics in there. It's probably going to get revised a bit, but that's where the ethics hangs out. All right. So these are the three ways and the three different levels I tend to think about these technologies. Now, for purposes of putting them in a paper and a journal article, right, there's these nice, neat boxes. But really, they run into one another, right? They're all intertwined. Okay. So as recently as about 10 years ago, scholars such as myself could sit down and just be like, I'm going to study how people interact with Alexa or how they interact with Siri. And at that time, right, those technologies were a really big deal. They were new. And they were the only form of artificial intelligence people interacted with that they would actually think is a type of AI. And so that made studying them a lot easier. Today, in about, in a very short period of time, we went from interacting with single AI technologies, many of which were not connected to one another, to an entire AI ecosystem. I don't know what it's like in Germany, and but in the United States, you can't go anywhere without hearing about AI. All of my applications, my Adobe, my Microsoft Word, my LinkedIn, okay, we're all feeling this, right? Or just like, hello, AI assistant, Adobe, I'm going to throw it out the window. Okay, we have Adobe Fresh. Today I was trying to read something. And it's like, this looks long. Would you like me to summarize? I'm like, no, I have a brain. And then this little AI assistant, would you like to ask it a question? I'm like, no. How do I make you go away? Right? Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one, because I was starting to feel, and Jean Burgess, who's another great researcher, she's at Queensland University of Technology. She gave a great ICA Steve Jones lecture in Australia, where she also talks about this and how it always appears with sparkles or some little cloud. It's like, ooh, like fairy dust, right? The point is, we are now enmeshed in these AI systems, whether or not we want to. And so I have drawn or put together this very obviously overly simplified, right, diagram of just journalism, right? So journalism prior to artificial intelligence, you would have had the journalist hanging out here, the news organization, right? The medium would have been the computer or the TV or the newspaper, magazine, et cetera, and it would go out to a mass audience. Now, this doesn't mean that the computer, the medium didn't matter. No, of course it did, right? The form and function of media matter. But in less than about a decade, right, we have not only the journalists, but we have automated writing programs. We may have chatbots being created by these news organizations. So, we have maybe the journalists working with these, or these working on their own, or just an independent chatbot that is hanging out, right? And then we have the computer, and then over here we have the audience members, but then we may have a social media bot that is going through and affecting what we see. And so we are now in this system, like it or not, want it or not, you can't pull the AI out anymore. There's no way. And unless you're like moving someplace without Wi-Fi. And I still think Adobe would find you. I'm not a fan, right? So so now, right? So as a consumer, we feel the frustration, but now as a researcher, and this is why I wanted to come to Zemke, right? Because you all, Andreas and others here, have done a lot of great work on mediatization, on dealing with the really messy stuff at the societal level when it comes to thinking about when things start to get really intertwined and we can't pull them apart anymore. And so these are the types of things I'm thinking about, is when we research, right, what people individually think about a particular technology, but now they have multiple different types of AI they're interacting with. So what do they even think AI is anymore? Right? We used to be able to say, well, some people think AI is this, some people think AI is this, some people think AI is this. It's messy, right? But now that's just all over the place. Okay. And so this for research, it's exciting because there's a lot of research, right? We doing the hot topic. I was just impressed by how many people are here and the fact that an area of communicative AI exists. For you students, we used to have lectures like this and very few people would show up. I have a colleague who went to give a lecture, I think right before it was Siri, or just right about the time of Siri, and was talking about human-machine communication, even with algorithms. And someone stood up in the room and said, that's not communication, and walked out. Those of us who helped to found human-machine communication joke, Gen AI is both the worst and best thing. It's a great thing because we no longer look like the crazy ones, because for a long time we did, right? And paper rejections. This is not communication. But also the fact that all of this has exploded so quickly. And there's plenty of work for people to do. So I'm so excited you all are doing the work. Very excited about that. All right. So now I want to talk about the consequences across media to get us to our point. This is coming from another paper Seth and I did. If you don't know Seth Lewis, he's in journalism. He's a little bit more old school journalism, but does journalism and AI research. He's been a great collaborator, of mine. I'm sorry, I keep on hitting the microphone. I apologize for the static you're getting from that. We came out with a commentary recently on what generative AI means for the media industries and why it matters to study the collective consequences for advertising, journalism, and public relations. So what Seth and I had noticed, because not only am I a former journalist, I also did some public relations work. And in the United States, I sit on a research board for a major public relations organization. And what Seth and I had noticed is that we would hear journalists talking about the same issues, that we would hear public relations professionals talking about, and that we would also kind of hear from our advertising friends. Now, there is research that goes across media industries, right? It's done here. Another great example is Mark Doiza, his work as well. But what we were noticing is that because of the structures of communication and media research, so because of the structures of the International Communication Association, or IMCR, right, of the journals, okay, that people are doing research in journalism and AI, people are doing research in public relations in AI, people are doing research in advertising in AI, and the creative industries in AI. And then you have the I'm trying to think of the word, the professionals in the industries also doing all these things. But no one is talking to one another about what is happening, at least in major bodies of work. So you have the journalism scholars writing for the journalism, folks and practitioners, the advertising scholars writing for the advertising folk and practitioners. And we're like, listen, y'all, this is big, right? This is much bigger than any one of us. And we need to kind of start thinking about some things. So let me go through and give you some examples of just the technologies that overlap, and then we'll get into what this all means. Okay. So AI in journalism. Let's look at how AI is being used in journalism. What is being done with AI in journalism? Okay. So journalists are doing information searches. They're using ChatGPT to do research. I know for some of us that is very upsetting, right? But they are looking at stuff up on ChatGPT. Transcription of notes in interviews. Okay, that is actually probably the highest use in journalism. Translation of information. Oh, y'all, as someone who is currently in a country where I am very bad at the language, I am grateful for AI and translation apps. It helped immensely at the grocery store, all right? Extraction of main ideas from documents, right? So reading through city council minutes, reading through these long government documents, and you can query what are the main ideas, right? Summarization of information. So maybe you're writing a news article and you want it summarized for social media, or you need summaries for a blurb. Data analysis. Now this is a little older, right? This is machine learning. This is data journalism, using it to find patterns to do investigative reporting. Categorization and recall of image files. So this also has really revolutionized the way that photojournalists work. Because once upon a time, if something was not saved the right way, you had to manually go through images, right? So you can find images faster. creation of news briefs, creation of stories through AI, personalization and localization of stories, audience targeting, right? So this kind of goes, if you notice, it goes from information seeking, information gathering, to content creation, to distribution, right? Audience targeting, as well as this use of chatbots, the integration, or news bots they're usually called, the integration of chatbots into journalism for conversational purposes, okay? And so depending on the newsroom, right, this is not all newsrooms, this would be major newsrooms, okay? All newsrooms are using them in some way. It just, you know, are they using full packages? Will vary. This is a lot of work that's being done by AI. Now, some of it is really basic, right? And really is a helpful tool. Being able to transcribe your notes in interviews and have that. When I worked back in the day, when we didn't even have, like, I had the old phone, I didn't have like even an iPhone. I couldn't even record with my phone, my friends. So I would have loved this, okay? And so there's mundane uses, but then there's also, there's those more uses that get a little bit closer to how we feel as humans. And that's really important to acknowledge, that AI does have many different forms and many different uses as well. Okay, so that's AI in journalism. Let's go to AI in public relations. And really, what I'm drawing from here is the Institute for Public Relations. It is a professional organization in the United States, but it is research-based. It is headed by someone with a PhD. So it's more based on research. All right, what are people working in public relations doing with AI? Well, they're using it to find information. They're using it to extract main ideas from documents they need to write about. They're using it to summarize information. They're using it to categorize and recall images. Does this look familiar? Okay, right? Creation of content, press releases, social media posts, okay? Personalization and localization of content, audience targeting and analytics. Now, this is where it does start to get a little bit different. And I mean, we have SEO in journalism. There's something now called AIO. So SEO, for those of you who are not familiar, is search engine optimization. Right? So this is the use of keywords to make sure people using the Google can find your stuff. Okay? The big question, one of the big issues now in public relations, any of you interested in studying public relations, this is worth, anyone looking for a free dissertation idea right here, is how do you control what shows up in ChatGPT? Because with Google, you could figure it out how the algorithms worked. You never really knew, but you could hack that, right? How do you hack ChatGPT? How do you make sure that your client, the way that AI is presenting them, for example, Meta AI and ChatGPT, how can you make sure that's accurate? Your company. And so now there's these new systems of studying what's called AI optimization and brand protection. And it's really, really tricky. AI is always wrong about me. It always says I like went to a different university. It always comes up with these wonderful papers with great titles, my friends, that I have not written. Maybe I should write these papers. I've always kind of joked about letting AI, right? So that's AI optimization. And then related to that is brand management. You know, how if artificial intelligence, if ChatGPT, if they're drawing on all of this information, and you don't know where it's coming from, and it's even more opaque than even Google was, you know, how do you manage a brand? So that's something that's a little bit newer. Although brand management, we also have that in news. Okay. And then they also use chatbots as well, right? Public-facing chatbots for their clients, right? Client-consumer interaction. Okay, so let's go to AI and advertising. So the categorization and recall of images, creation of images, text, video for ads, or the entire ad. All right, so now we're creating things. Personalization of ads, right? Just like personalization of news stories. All right, audience targeting and analytics, SEO and AIO, right? Because advertising and public relations are very close. And brand management. This one I just made a little shorter because I didn't want to repeat everything from the previous slides, right? Point being, there are some distinct differences, right? And there are distinct goals between journalism, public relations, and advertising. But a lot of the tools are being used across these industries and in very similar ways across these industries. And along with this comes opportunities as well as challenges that are shared across industries. Right. I should also say that another one with advertising are AI virtual influencers, which I'm going to talk about now. So I want to think about some of these challenges or some of the ways some of these questions show up similarly, but a little bit differently across industry. The first thing I want to talk about is brand management and particularly brand consumer interaction. Okay. Does anyone know who this is? Okay. Right, little Michaela, right? Who is she, it? Yeah, so she's a virtual influencer. For those of you who don't know, she's an AI influencer. And the AI influencers are now growing. Is anyone in here studying AI influencers? Man, I was just hoping I could just hand the next 5 minutes off to you. Okay, so they are growing. They are used in advertising and branding right now. But public relations is now starting to think about, well, how can we use virtual entities, right, to interact with audiences, to engage with audiences for our clients. Instead of just selling products, how can we build relationships with products, okay, or with people? And in journalism, right, this type of thing, you know, we have the idea for having virtual or AI news anchors. We've seen that in China and some other places where you have a created image that delivers the news. So a little bit different, but at the same time, they're all artificial beings, right? Being presented as humans, delivering information. Let's look at another kind of example. So this is more US based, but I think it's a great example to draw on. So today in New York, some of you are very up on your New York news, there is a big mayoral election. Crossing my fingers. And, including a liberal candidate who is young and is really shaking up the establishment. That person is being supported by an ex-New York mayor, Bill de Blasio. About 2 weeks ago, the Times of London printed this article about how this ex-mayor, Bill de Blasio, was no longer supporting this person. And it just blew up everywhere, except it was false. Long story short, there's another Bill de Blasio who is a wine marketer, and a journalist went to get a comment from who they thought was the mayor, Bill de Blasio. Are you with me on here? Okay. Journalist sends email to wrong email address. Listen, y'all, as a former journalist, it's hard, okay? So if you know, right, well, let's give them a little pass on that one, all right? They should have double checked and triple checked and quadruple checked, okay? But then this Bill de Blasio person should have been like, I'm not that dude, okay? He didn't. Instead, he answered the journalist's questions. Does anyone know what he used to answer them? ChatGPT. He used ChatGPT to sound like the real Bill de Blasio. And you're all like, that's it, we give up. Civilization, we're done. Let's all go have a drink, right? And then for Mondavi, this turns into a big, for that candidate, he turns into a huge PR issue for him. So this is where, and so sometimes it's not, you know, the AI role here was small. There was a lot of human error, but it was significant. Because as a journalist, if you've interviewed someone enough, or if you've read enough of them, you can tell, be like, wait a minute, this person's actually, hold on, am I even talking? But the fact that that person used ChatGPT to sound like that mayor. And the fact that you know, they weren't meeting in person, so you couldn't tell. And so this is where you actually have public relations issues running into, right, journalism issues as well, because the two are intertwined. We'll talk more about that. And then we have ongoing issues around labor, right? A lot of journalists, a lot of public relations professionals, a lot of advertisers, right? A lot of people working in Hollywood, from the writers to the talent, right? If you hadn't heard, there was a AI actor recently launched, Tilly Norwood. You can look her up, right? It was mainly a publicity stunt, which is why I don't want to give it too much attention, right? But all of these different people working and creating and doing across all these industries now have to think about not only, okay, is what I do important, but how do I protect my work? How do I protect my job, right? Another thing all these industries have in common when we think about creative industries as well is the fact that OpenAI and other forms of artificial intelligence have sucked up copyrighted work. And so journalists have had their work used and abused. Public relations officials, either their or their clients' work, used and abused. Advertisers, same. Creatives, movie, entertainment, same. Okay. Oops, come on. And so when we think about the media ecosphere, these industries do, I mean, up here they fit in nice little squares, right? And in research, we could probably put 90% of the journals that look at these into these nice little squares. There'd be a few that that could go in every square or hang out in the middle, like New Media and Society, okay? Steve Jones did not pay me to say that, those of you who know him. But these industries also rely on one another. So the AI is not just being used within each industry. They rely on one another. Journalists get information from public relations professionals. Public relations professionals rely on journalists to get stories out. Advertisers and public relations, right? There's a lot of overlap there. Also with entertainment, right? So we could draw circles and lines. They all feed into and inform one another. And so if you think about that picture I showed you of just that small newsroom and the consumers, right? Or that, you know, that diagram I showed you. Now think about that for all of these industries. And how much AI is intertwined and interceding between the industries. And so now when you have interactions via AI or content created by AI or information sent out via AI to consumers or to these other industries, you're just I keep on thinking of the famous phrase, it's turtles all the way down. For those of you who do qualitative research, it's AI all the way down. It's just AI, AI, AI. And so it's also the configurations. This is the bigger issue. The configurations are changing so fast. And it's disrupting so fast. And we're having a hard time keeping up with it. And the point that Seth and I were making is that you can't figure this out for any one individual industry if you only focus on that industry. It's impossible. And so we need more work that looks at this larger ecosystem and looks at these larger interactions and tries to pull at those threads. And our one flaw, you could say, of our paper was that it focused primarily on the content creators, right? I haven't even talked about consumers yet. But let's talk about consumers for a moment. From the consumer side of things, these industries are not separate. So when you're scrolling social media, when most people are scrolling social media, they're not in their head going, oh, this is coming from journalism, this is coming from PR, this is coming from advertising. No, it's just all the same slop. It's all the same stuff. It's all mixed up, intertwined. And now you also have artificial intelligence increasingly being the point of contact with consumers. I mean, I think all of us have also experienced anytime we're trying to get help with something and we get that AI chatbot. Okay. I think Adobe runs it. I'm sorry. Can you tell I really hate Adobe? Sorry. I don't know why. I was fighting with it earlier. And so, like the consumer-facing side, and you can't even get a hold of a human, and you can't even get information from a human. And I'm not saying humans are all that great anyway. We're kind of horrible, right? We talk about that too. But the point being is that these relationships and flows of information are being extremely disrupted. Where am I at on time? Okay. And this is what Seth and I are thinking about, right? Is how do we try and trace these dimensions, right? A lot of what I talked about just now, particularly when I was listing off what each industry is using it for, is more the functional dimension, right? The kind of the basics, who's doing what are the flows? But then really thinking about these relational dynamics, and then getting into the metaphysical and the social and societal dynamics. Because one of my greatest frustrations is that, especially as a researcher in human-machine communication, people think that if it talks like a human, you can substitute it for a human. We have this phrase in English. It goes, if it talks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, then it must be a duck. AI, right? It's being increasingly showing that it's human-like, but it's not, right? So that doesn't work for it, but it seems like it does. So now, for example, more and more people have interviews for jobs via AI. Have any of you had this yet, where you've had an interview for a job that was with an AI agent? I was just wondering. Okay. It's happening quite a bit in the US. And the point is that AI is not human. Yes, it can ask questions that a human could ask, but it is not a human. The relational dynamics have changed, and they're not being paid attention to. And what are the larger questions then when companies like OpenAI, Meta, Elon Musk think that AI can be substituted for humans? We're seeing that politically, right? And it is not good. And so this goes even beyond media, right? But media are some of the key places that this is occurring. And with that, I'm going to end so we can have a discussion, questions, all that good stuff.